OTAs was 2 days ago, but yesterday was the first day open to the media. We had a lot of talk about it. The press conferences that we saw from all the quarterbacks, head coach Kyle Shanahan, the reports that we heard. Me and Suneil, we're here to break it down and give our own thoughts of what we heard yesterday. All after this.
Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on three. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the program. I've got my main guy, Suneil, here. We're talking 49ers football. How you doing, man?
Man, everything is going great, man. I like the new setup. It seems like you outside enjoying the sun rays. I don't know if is it sunny up north right now?
It's pretty sunny. Yeah, it's pretty sunny.
It's
It's like a nice breezy day, but it's still I'd assume in the 60s today. So it's pretty nice today.
It's super overcast here. It looks like it's about to rain, so we definitely don't have no sun.
Yeah, that kind of sucks, which is interesting because I'm in SoCal tomorrow. I'm in SoCal
really?
tomorrow. Yeah, so hopefully it don't rain when I'm there for the weekend.
Maybe it'll get it all out of the way tonight.
Hopefully. But, man, we're here to talk 49ers football. And, I said this with Jesse yesterday. It's just exciting, man. Football is back. And, it's OTAs, right? It's
Right.
OTAs compared to real live action and all that kind of stuff. But just we had this entire offseason. Obviously, there's draft talk. There's free agency talk. We've got all that out of the way. And now we're really back to players being on the field, hearing about football again. And I think it's a nice breath of fresh air.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously there's a lot going on with the 49ers. All the whether it be Vegas or odds makers overall, 49ers are a Super Bowl favorite. I think they're in the top 5. I think they're the second. I think the Eagles might have a little bit better odds, but out of the NFC, it's the Eagles and the 49ers that are there as far as favorites. So it's interesting, especially because we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be. So that I think is exciting to finally take some steps towards answering that question, which I know is at the forefront of all the discussions on Twitter, all the discussions in the media, and has led to some fiery conversation over content creation as well.
Hey, you said it's the forefront. That's where we got to start today. Quarterbacks, right? We saw two of them were on the field yesterday, but all three talked, which was interesting. 49ers let all three talk. Kyle Shanahan talked about the quarterbacks as well. Just broadly, first, what did you take away from yesterday, all the quarterback reports? There's a lot to unpack, I'm sure.
Well, first, the shade to Allen is just seeping through your pores right now. There was 3 quarterbacks out there for the 49ers.
Yeah. My bad. Sorry. With the first 2 teams. Yeah, my bad, Brandon. Shout out Brandon.
But the first overall takeaway was, man, the 49ers are down for all the smoke, right? Because clearly this discussion has taken a life of its own over, who's going to be the starter. Is it going to be Lance or is it going to be Darnold? Is Purdy going to be healthy? And the 49ers came out on their, with the united front and was just like, we're going to make everybody available and try to give us your best shot. And I was telling Jesse yesterday, I was like, actually, the 4 quarterbacks that the 49ers have all spoke because Kyle Shanahan is always going to be QB1, and he spoke as well. So my overall takeaways were, it seems like everybody's on the same page. It didn't seem like there was any confusion as far as what the situation was. Brock Purdy is obviously focused on what he needs to focus on, which is, getting healthy. He had a very tempered position as far as when he was going to be ready. He knew he's on track and all that kind of stuff, but he doesn't want to get ahead of himself and doesn't want to over promote or over promise his availability, which I think is great and a great way to approach it. Sam Darnold is focused on what he needs to focus on. And I think this is one of the bigger takeaways is he still needs to learn the system, right? So for everybody that was over here, like Sam Darnold is the greatest thrower in 49er history, and Sam Darnold is, for sure going to be taking over the number one spot. Clearly, he still has a lot to learn just in this system before, he's going to have that opportunity to even fend for that. And that was shown through him taking all the second team snaps, obviously day one. So don't read too much into it. And then Trey Lance obviously continued to be Trey Lance. Anytime he goes to the podium, Rohan, I'm extremely impressed. Obviously, he's a young kid. He's gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. There's no way he can't be hearing all of the noise that has been happening in the media and through the fan base and things of that nature. And he just has such a good head on his shoulders. And I thought he was extremely open and honest about how he was looking at the situation. The biggest takeaways for me were, one, when I thought was a great question, actually. One of the beat writers asked them, obviously there has been talks about you being traded. Did you at any point feel like maybe that was the best thing for you to get traded? And even before the question was finished, he was like, no, I love being here for the 49ers. This is the place I want to be. I love this team. I love this coaching staff, which was great. And then the second thing was they asked him straight up, it seems like the team has come out and said that Brock Purdy has a lead in the locker room.
Yeah.
And, what is that? How do you approach knowing that, if he's healthy, he would be the starter? And he was like, look, this is what I told you guys at the end of last season. I already knew based off of how he played that he was going to be the one. And all I wanted was an opportunity to compete. And that's what I have. And to me, that was just such a, regardless of who it is, because Brock Purdy impressed during his presser as well. I think that he's great as well. But whomever is going to lead this team, whether it's Brock Purdy or Trey Lance, both of those young men carry themselves so well, are extremely mature, and handle the media extremely well. And I just love their approach to each one are dealing with their own trials and tribulations right now. But the way that each one is handling it, I think, is phenomenal. That was probably my biggest takeaway just from the quarterback side of things, Rob.
I think that there's a lot, like you said, to unpack it. I think a lot of what you said is like I agree with, and the main thing is like it seems like everybody's on the same page, right? Clearly, it's been very, very clear this offseason. Fans are not on the same page with the quarterback talk. There's been Trey Lance talk, Brock Purdy talk, Sam Darnold talk. I mean, there's been Jimmy Garoppolo talk back when even he knew that we all knew he was not going to be here.
Right. Tom Brady talk
to begin the season. Aaron Rodgers talked. Lamar Jackson. I mean, we could go on and on and on. But it's pretty clear in the building there's like somewhat of a unison. And I thought all three quarterbacks exemplified that yesterday. Let's start with Brock Purdy. I mean, he made it very clear there's no definitive. He's not going to put something out there to where we can go back and say he said this. We can take it back. He's taking it day by day. He understands the process, and it's clear also. I think he wants to come back and he's trying to play week one. I think that's clear. But there are two things I take away. He understands how the process works, and the other thing is also Kyle Shanahan said one thing that I thought was really important, and that's you have to understand that you need to come back before. There needs to be some level of practice before he comes back and is on the field. They believe he's on track to do that, which is a great sign for the 49ers. I think if they can get all three of their top quarterbacks healthy and have them healthy at that point, I think that that's the best sign for the 49ers. Now, as for how realistic that is, I'm not exactly sure. Obviously, only time will tell. But it is important to know they're not going to just throw him out there week one. You do need there is some buildup needed with Brock Purdy. As for Trey Lance, he was pretty clear, not taking anything away from Brock. All he wants is a chance to compete. That's been the same sentiment he said all offseason. He's been pretty clear with who his character is and how he reflects himself. And I think that's been pretty clear all offseason. So not too surprised with what he said. And as for Sam Darnold, obviously when we initially heard some reports great throw over the football and things. I mean, and then major media like Ian Rappaport and several other outlets saying how Sam Darnold could be the guy that steps up if Brock Purdy's not healthy. He himself just straight up said Yeah, I'm still here. I'm learning. Like, there is a learning process that still goes on, which is why I wasn't surprised at all that because Trey Lance was cleared, he took all of the first team reps yesterday. Again, first team reps in OTAs, you don't maybe take too much out of it. You wait for until everybody's acclimated. But right now, yeah, I think that there's an understanding in the quarterback room of all of everybody's role, and I think that's important to know. And as for the competition itself, I think we're. I mean, I don't think OTAs will tell anything, but really, yeah, this situation is interesting because I still am of the belief that the 49ers are going to trot somebody else other than Brock Purdy out there for QB1. But Jesse brought up a good point yesterday that I agreed with and I was thinking as well, which is the short leash on quarterbacks, right, this year. How is that going to play out? Because in the past, we haven't had this situation before. But this year, you've got quarterbacks who I think this is the strongest quarterback competition that we've had. Again, barring hopefully no injuries happen going in. But if Brock Purdy returns, I do wonder, what do you think about that?
Yeah, and I would go back to Kyle Shanahan's nature. And Kyle Shanahan's nature when it comes to any position, whether that be running back, offensive line, um, wide receiver, linebacker, whatever the case may be, Kyle Shanahan is really adamant about continuity and keeping what's working together. And even if it's not necessarily working as far as wins, he feels like he one thing for better or worse. Maybe some people look at this as a negative. I personally look at it as a positive. He has a plan. He sticks to his plan, and he wants to see it all the way through. So to me, when it comes to short leash, I personally believe that if because I feel like there's a 90% chance Trey Lance is the week one starter. I think the only reason he's not a starter is if he somehow gets injured this offseason, because I don't think that Brock Purdy is going to be healthy enough in time to be able to play numerous preseason games and get that timing and all that kind of stuff back with his first team and be cleared enough to do all that kind of stuff to be ready to play week one. So I personally believe that Trey Lance is going to be the week one starter because Brock Purdy isn't going to be healthy enough. If Brock Purdy was healthy, I think he would be the week one starter. Now,
I'm
with
going to
that
hold
being,
you to this. I'm
yeah,
coming back to
absolutely.
this video. No, I'm kidding.
Sure. I've been saying
Because
it
I
on
agree
every
with, I
stream.
mean, yeah, I mean, in agreement here. So,
Yeah. So then when it comes to week one, I think at that point it's Trey Lance's job to lose. I personally believe Trey Lance is going to be play well enough to where Kyle Shanahan can't yank him. So to me, I think that Trey Lance will win that job. The only reason Brock Purdy would come in is if there's an injury. Because if Trey Lance plays bad enough to where he gets pulled for Brock Purdy, I think that's the end of Trey Lance, possibly in the NFL. So like that's like a big deal. So I personally just feel just based off of the character of the kid, what he's doing in the offseason, who he's working with, and just what I've seen from him enough to see the flashes. I just think he's going to be fine, especially with the team that he has around him. So it's kind of tough for Brock Purdy because he obviously has done enough to be a starter in this league as well. And unfortunately, injuries may have changed that. But as to directly answer your question about the short leash, I don't know if Shanahan has that in his system. Like, I don't think he's big on breaking up that continuity, and we saw it. I think one of the bigger examples was 2 years ago with Aaron Banks. Remember, he talked
mhm.
about how like Aaron Banks was ready to start, and we saw in year two how well he played. And if he has anything like that year one, he could have probably possibly been an asset to the team. However, Kyle Shanahan said, look, the continuity of the offensive line, that we're playing well together, and we didn't want to change that up. What is more of a shift than changing the quarterback, right? Especially if, let's say the 49ers in their first four games go 3-1 or 4-0. Do you really want to make that change? Because how much pressure is that on Brock Purdy to keep that same momentum?
And I think that that's a good point. But the one thing you did say early on, right, is Trey Lance you believe Trey Lance will play well enough in that 4 games to where he doesn't turn around. To me, even if it's not Trey Lance, if it's Brock Purdy, if it's Sam Darnold or whoever, I do wonder, like, yes, if you play well, I believe whoever the week 1 starter is, I think if they play well, I think that's the guy for the foreseeable future next year. But what if that play wavers in that first stretch of games, especially understanding that there's essentially a 4 game home stretch from week 2 to week 5? What if that play wavers? What do you think then?
It's just it would be out of character for Kyle Shanahan to do. He doesn't make panic moves. You know what I mean? Like he's not the type to do that. And I understand the point. Like this might be a different scenario because in the past maybe he hasn't had uh, as much talent in the quarterback room. But even even in Trey Lance's rookie year, I think there was times where they could have pulled out Jimmy Garoppolo because of bad play. You know what I mean? And he chose not to. Remember, initially he was doing the whole rotation thing, and then all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, like let's just rock with one person." I think that probably plays in the back of his mind, and I would play in the back of his mind. I just don't see it in Kyle Shanahan's nature to make a move like that just based off of bad play. Because and I'll say this as well. I don't think that Brock Purdy's play, if he's the starter, is going to be to the point where he's going to be worth being yanked either. I think he's competent enough in this offense. And you know what's interesting, Rohan? I'm a big Kyle Shanahan guy, but one thing we know about Kyle Shanahan's personality is, he does have an ego, as most of us do. The way Brock Purdy talks about Kyle is like the teacher's pet, right? He's always kind of gassing Kyle Shanahan, so how much he learns from Kyle Shanahan, and the way he's coached, and he gives Kyle Shanahan full credit for everything, and I think that plays a role in why Shanahan's probably enamored with him as well. So I personally don't think if Trey or Brock Purdy start, with whomever ends up starting week 1, I don't think either of them will play bad enough to warrant being yanked. And because I think Kyle Shanahan's leash is a lot longer than most other coaches. He doesn't have the same pressure, I think, as other coaches, so he could just rock with it.
And when you talk about that, I do agree in the fact that I can see both quarterbacks or whoever having a strong start and then continuing forward. I can see that. The one thing I will say is I do believe this year is different. When we talk about 2021, the year where obviously Jimmy Garoppolo, the chances that there was a chance he could be yanked. I think that finger injury does derail a bit of Trey Lance's. I think it stunted his growth that year, and he himself openly admitted it. And so I just think that there are different circumstances this year. Now, whether that will reveal itself to be something different, I'll see. I'm on your side in that I do believe Kyle Shanahan isn't a guy who panics. I do think that he'll give whichever quarterback some room to grow. But I do wonder, especially, because it is such a young group, but I do wonder with a season where, you might want to start strong, understanding that the back half's a little harder. Is there more of a sense of urgency if there's faltering play in the early weeks from whichever quarterback starts week 1?
I just think that that would be a shot at his ability to develop, right? Because at the end of the
Yeah,
day, it's
that's
not
fair.
like either any of these quarterbacks are necessarily, none of them have put together the resume to be warrant, like, for sure this is an upgrade over the other, right? So are you really, how are you really benefiting, I guess, in that case? It's not like you're bringing in a for sure upgrade per se. So I personally don't see that happening. I think the only reason why there's a quarterback change is due to injury, and you
Okay.
know that we haven't seen Kyle Shanahan, I really believe, in at any position change because of bad play, right?
Yeah, and I mean, again, it's a topic that we'll see going forward. And obviously, the hope is you don't have to make a quarterback change. Whoever you
Right.
go with week one is good enough to where you can win the role. We will be getting to position battles in a minute, Fernando. I see your comment in the chat. But on the quarterback talk, to end it off, we've got Trey Lance, we've got Sam Darnold, obviously, in this 1-2 punch. Kyle Shanahan said something. I, maybe it's adding spice to the conversation, but he did say, "Don't take much away from the who gets 1 reps, who gets 2 reps. Wanted to even it out." What does that tell you? Does that tell you anything this offseason? How do you feel about that comment from Shanahan itself? After obviously we saw Lance earn the 1 reps for the first 2 days, Darnold the 2 reps for the first 2 days.
Yeah, I mean, he put a couple of cryptic messages out there, right? The
Only
other one,
God knows.
yeah, only God knows. But I think the one is when he was talking about. I think somebody asked him about the Eagles, and he was saying, I'm glad that we're not playing the Eagles week one because we don't have our full team there.
Yeah,
We like so. Well, who's missing, right? The only person that would be missing would be
it's
Brock
Brock
Purdy. So
Purdy.
is that a cryptic message that he still believes Brock Purdy is QB1? But I think it's all more of the same. Like I think that Kyle Shanahan doesn't want to anoint anybody. He wants to make sure that his message is everybody has to earn this job. This is Brock Purdy's job, and everybody else has to earn their position. So that was probably more of a message to Trey and to Sam that like, hey, just because you got the first snaps right now or you got the number 2 snaps right now doesn't mean that tomorrow you're not going to get the first. Like be ready, compete, and I think that that's the way he's always approached things. So for me, could you argue with it? Yeah, but I think it obviously there's different philosophies, but this is Kyle Shanahan's philosophy. His philosophy is don't anoint anybody, make everybody earn it type of thing.
Yeah, I think so too. I agree with that. That is his philosophy. And quarterbacks, man, that's going to be the talk of the trade for until week one. And even after week one, I think, especially with this group, where I think it's the strongest competition we've seen with 3 quarterbacks, I think that this could be a talk that we hear for a while. But like I said, let's move on to the position battles because every offseason, a huge part of every team is what position battles are there in training camp in the offseason. And obviously, the 49ers as well. They've had some departures this year. You talk about key guys like Mike McGlinchey, Samson Ebicom, Charles O'Menahue, Jimmy Ward. I could go on about a couple of guys. Some key departures this year, which leaves positions where there might not be an unsolidified starter or even unsolidified backups. Immediately off the top of your head, what are you thinking about one position battle to watch? We can go back and forth in a way.
Yeah. I'll start off with which I think is one of the bigger ones is who's the fourth defensive lineman? Is it going to be Drake Jackson? Is it going to be somebody else that they brought in, a new guy? Or is that a position that they go and get? Because there's a lot of free agents still available that I think can definitely be an upgrade there if they don't see what they need to see, out of a guy like Drake Jackson. You would think that Drake Jackson, they're hoping that he's the guy because obviously they drafted him with a second round pick. But I think that's really important because this is probably as far as interior defensive line with the addition of Hargrave. Obviously, we know Bosa is who Bosa is. Armstead is who they are. Like those 3 positions are pretty much solidified, and whomever that fourth person is going to be extremely important because they can eat. You know what I mean? Like that's a position that I think can wreak a lot of havoc because so much attention is going to be paid to those other 3 positions. So, especially, if with the way this defense has played in the past, I think that's an extremely important position to see if Drake Jackson could come out and actually take that role.
I agree. And I mean, you said it itself. It's important. We've seen in the past that that fourth position is important. Just even look at last year, right? Last year, I think we heard, yeah, that position, that defensive line position, or that defensive line group, It's not that the talent wasn't there. It's just it wasn't on par as previous groups in terms of sack rate. I mean, you can pull up statistics. You could also just pull up pure production and what you saw on the field itself with your with the eye test. But that also comes down to, can we get a solidified guy at that fourth spot? Something I said, I think it's more important to have three down players. 49ers go out, they get arguably the best defensive lineman on the market in Javon Hargrave. Massive deal there. Whether what his snap count will be is intriguing to me. Will they play him more on? Will they play him on rundowns significantly, or will they have a rotation there with the amount of defensive tackle depth they have? But to me, I think a big question is the edge group, right? It's not as deep as the defensive tackle group, so there is a good amount counting on Drake Jackson, and I do think that this is somewhat of a make or break offseason for him in terms of getting a solidified role on this team for the future. He looks the part right now. He looks big. He looks like he should. We saw some pictures of Drake Jackson, who's bulked up, just the coaches have been hyping up this an entire offseason. So that's a good sign. The question to me is, how does he go against the run, and is he more more developed as a pass rusher? Because he was raw. He was a raw second round pick with a ton of upside. Now, how does that translate? How does the current floor translate to its potential, and how quickly? Those are the questions that we see this offseason, and potentially see um, whether Drake Jackson ends up being the guy, or the 49ers go out in the free agent market and sign a veteran in training camp.
Absolutely, and obviously from what we saw physically, he's put in the work, and I think that was something that Wilkes spoke about in his presser, I think last week. Drake Jackson has been in the weight room and understood that was something that he needed, was to bulk up and get stronger. But I think what you mentioned is extremely important. This is when we're talking about raw talent, this is Drake Jackson didn't have many moves past just being faster than everybody, right? So has he learned the swim move? Has he learned the spin move? Has he, worked on the technique of being an outside, outside rusher? Because he's going to benefit from a lot of single coverage and maybe some blown coverage, right? Because the other guys on that defensive line have to be, thought about so much, and defensive, like the offensive line is going to be focused on those guys that a lot of times he's going to be the odd man out that could really take advantage. So you can't take advantage though if you can't beat your man one-on-one, which was something he struggled to do last year. So I think that is extremely important. What other positions are you looking at?
Yeah, and before I get to one that I'm thinking about, I do want to give a shout out to Bay Area Baller 18. Got a good channel of his going on. He pulled up Suneil also. 49ers throwback, throwing you a compliment here. But Bay Area Baller here brings up a position battle that I was going to bring up a little later. Let's bring it up now, though. TE2. A lot of the talk is right now around Cam Latu, Charlie Warner. Maybe even Ross Dwelly's in the mix, although I don't believe that as much. It's really, the talk is between Latu and Warner, the second Latu got drafted. But Braden Willis is a guy who I was higher on than Latu out of the draft. A guy who made a huge play yesterday. One of the highlights of camp and of OTAs. And again, it's one play. But what do you think about this TE2 battle, which really has been up in the air ever since George Kittle broke out in 2018?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I don't think we've really understood from a Kyle Shanahan perspective what he wants out of that tight end too, right? So, does he want a pass catcher? You would think, yeah, but then Dwelly never gets the opportunities that you would think, because even though he has amazing hands, right? Does he want just a pure blocker? Maybe, but Warner doesn't get, the amount of run that you would think, like, to be able to get. So it's kind of like confusing as far as what exactly he's looking for out of that tight end two position. So just because of that, Rohan, I would say absolutely it's open to anybody, because I don't know what really is the role of that tight end two, other than filling in for Kittle whenever there is an injury type of thing, right? So can Braden Willis get a role there? Absolutely. I think that obviously Kittle was a 5th-round draft pick, and he ended up being the starter. So just because Latu was a 3rd-round pick, I don't think that necessarily guarantees him anything over any of these other tight ends. So it's absolutely open, but I'm confused as far as what exactly Kyle Shanahan and that staff wants from a tight end too.
That's a good question. That's a good question. And here's my understanding. To me, excuse me, to me, what Kyle Shanahan wants, he wants a multi-dimensional player. But in order to get on the field, I think it's similar to receivers. Receivers, what do you want? You obviously want a solid route runner. You want a guy who has surefire hands and all those abilities. But Danny Gray has said it himself. In this offense,
You got to
you're
block.
going to have to be able to block. I think it's a similar philosophy with the tight ends. I think you're looking for a pass catcher because you want a guy who can be a difference maker on the field. But in order to play you, you've got to be able to block. And so that's why I think the guy who we saw really get more run towards the end of the year, and I can't say for certain, but I think had probably the highest snap count of the backups last year was Tyler Croft. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why Tyler Croft isn't like he's an amazing at everything. He's really amazing at one specific thing. But I thought he was the best combination of a blocker and a pass catcher that the 49ers had last year, or at least that's what the building believed. And so that's where you see him get the most snaps. So to me, it's a guy who definitely I think it's a guy who has to be able to block first, but has the ability to be a pass catcher. And that's who you're looking for as a tight end of the future. A guy who could potentially replace George Kittle once his career with the 49ers is over. And that's a good question because I don't know if the 49ers have that on their roster right now
Right.
still. I don't think that with the backup position right now, in terms of pure floors, I don't know if they upgraded right now. Because when you talk about rookies, again, the acclimation period for rookies with the Shanahan offense can take a while. Obviously, we saw Spencer Burford immediately come in as a plug and play starter last year, but that's not necessarily the norm, right? It's normally an injury that takes place that kind of pushes a player in there, like Elijah Mitchell during his rookie season. But to me, this is what I'm intrigued about. And we've also heard how Braden Willis could be a guy played in that fullback, like that versatile fullback role, and could be fullback, could be a tight end in line or in the slot. He could be a guy played in multiple roles. But to me, I think it's really who flashes the most out of the backups. Um, and right now, I think Willis. I like the take that I think Willis has a good shot to potentially get that role earlier than Latu. I'm not as high on Latu. I've said that in articles. I've said that I thought that was a overdraft, and I think Willis provides more upside than Latu. The only thing is, how quickly can the blocking come together? I think that's really the biggest question as to who gets more playing time. As for who I believe will be TE2 starting week one, I still think it'd be Charlie Warner. I think he's got a full offseason right now. Last year, I think a big portion of the mixture was Warner was not healthy in the offseason. He had that groin strain, I believe, or something that really limited him in the offseason that allowed the other guys like Croft to get TE1 snaps in camp and starting the year. But I think he's got a healthy offseason, standing on the playbook, and I think right now he probably is the TE2 week one. That can change though for sure.
Yeah. Another position group I'm paying attention to is uh, cornerback depth,
Hmm.
um, and that slot corner, right? So last year it was primarily Jimmy Ward. Obviously, we saw Womack play there at the beginning of the season, but then when Jimmy Ward got healthy, primarily it was Jimmy Ward
Jimmy
was
Ward,
was
yeah.
was in there, right? Especially after Mitchell or Mosley went down and Verrett ended up being unavailable, and Lenore just had to play on the outside and played well. But right now, as far as um, known commodities, I guess we could put that, we really only have our belief in Mooney Ward and Diamador Lenore. Outside of them on the cornerback position, it's a lot of there's potential there, but we're not 100% sure. Is Samuel Womack going to take that leap that most second year players on the 49ers take to really solidify himself as that third corner in case of injury? I think Isaiah Oliver is going to end up with that position of slot corner. I think he brings a lot to the table, and obviously what we've heard from him, the little we've heard already from OTAs, he's played well. How good is Luther going to be? As far as the rookie, and is Ambry Thomas ever going to be worthy of that third round draft pick? It's not looking good at this point, but we know that the 49ers in previous years have been decimated by injuries in the cornerback room. Last year, because of the type of depth that we had, it didn't play a big role because we had so many options there with Mosley, with Verrett, with Lenore. Luckily, we were able to stand pat and actually thrive. Is that same depth there now? We're not sure, right? So that's, I think, going to be extremely interesting to see. Can Samuel Womack step up? That'll go a long way. Is Isaiah Oliver, the second round talent that he was drafted to be, is that going to come to fruition now that he's fully healthy, and so on and so forth? So I think that is an extremely important thing to see during this offseason, Rohan, because if it's not, I would hate to go back to a couple years ago where we're just picking up guys off of the couch to play secondary. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And this is an interesting topic that I actually wrote about fairly recently. I talked about the cornerback position as a group where I believe I have a certain take on it. We obviously have the departure of Jimmy Ward. Lenore right now seems like he's solidified on the outside. The depth, I think, is a big thing, right? Because you talked about the depth coming into this offseason. I said cornerback depth is going to be one of the bigger areas that the 49ers need to fill. Why? Because going into the offseason, I thought they had three guys that were ready to make a 53-man roster for this team. That was the starting two guys and Womack because of the flash, special teams ability, and draft status. I don't think Ambry Thomas is guaranteed a spot at all. And so with three spots available or with three spots filled, I thought that there was at least two guys that the 49ers needed to add and potentially even more. Why? Because last year the 49ers had five corners and five safeties on their initial 53. However, when you look at it, that group was more versatile. You had guys like Jimmy Ward. Jimmy Ward is a safety and a nickel. He's a guy who could play corner when you asked him to play corner. He played corner for the entire year. So it added an extra body, even though he was technically considered a safety to begin the year. I think Deshaun Gibson still can rep the big nickel role, but I don't think he can do it that consistently. What I'm saying, though, is overall with the depth, you might need more corners this year, understanding that your group isn't as versatile as it has been in the past because of how valuable Jimmy Ward was to this team. And so that's where I look at this group where they might look to add another body, or they might go with five, but also try and see maybe does a Quantrez Knight or a Taylor Hawkins fit into this team as one of those extra safeties, and potentially try them out as well at corner as another guy who could potentially make the 53. But what I'm looking at with the nickel spot specifically, I think it's Isaiah Oliver's job. When we heard Steve Wilkes the other day, he talked about how when they couldn't get Jimmy Ward back, which was pretty clear because he wanted to play safety, they wanted to get the top nickel on the market. That was Isaiah Oliver in their eyes. And Isaiah Oliver right now, I personally think he'll have a grasp on this role. I still don't know what Samuel Womack's role will be in the NFL. Because is he a nickel guy? Is he an outside guy? Is he both a nickel and an outside guy? I don't know, but I think that there is a good value with him being depth, especially with special teams capabilities. But Oliver, to me, I think is going to play better in the nickel. He has improved after not looking great early on in his career. Since being moved to the nickel in Atlanta, the 49ers think highly of him. And I think it's another 1 year stopgap solution to where the 49ers could eventually turn to Womack in 2025. I'm looking at this roster, and I think there are some 2025 guys. Danny Gray is one of them, and we'll get to receiver in a little bit. Danny Gray is one of them. I don't think he has that big of a role in 2024 just because I think there are guys ahead of him that are solidified and have specific roles that worked out last year on offense. Womack, to me, is the other guy. I think he's another guy who could utilize another year to get a little bigger and also potentially work or fill out into his frame a little more to work into that nickel role in 2025, where you still have 2 more years of team control and allowing him a better, a little more of a developmental curve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think out of all of the position groups, the cornerbacks are probably the weakest group right now. Not necessarily because of they might not end up being the weakest group, but they just, I guess, weakest is probably not the right answer. The most question marks there
Yeah,
because we don't have as many proven commodities quite yet.
yeah, man, I agree, and that's another thing where Jesse brought this up yesterday when we were talking about cornerbacks, and the one thing you hope that the injury bug doesn't hit as hard as it has at that position this year, because cornerbacks in the 49ers, there have been injuries like consistently every year where you've relied on some of that depth. 2 years ago, obviously there were some injury issues. I think Emmanuel Mosley didn't start the year off, and then
Oh,
last year
Verrett got injured 2 years ago.
Verrett,
I
I mean,
remember.
yeah, Verrett was the big one in 2021 with the ACL in week 1. Mosley didn't come back till week 2. And so you're relying on guys like Drake Kirkpatrick and Josh Norman at some points in the season.
Yeah,
Last year, Ward obviously was there the majority of the year, but Mosley ACL in week 5. And when we talk about Travarius Ward, he's missed 3 or 4 games normally a year in his career. But the other part is he missed some time last year in games. He had
right,
injuries in games that where he's a competitive. He's a fierce competitor. He was able to return to games, but you do worry because you need a guy that can slot in there. And injuries are a part of the game in general. But is there a trustworthy option right now that you believe can really fit in? That's a question that I think needs to be answered
right.
with that group. And I mean, we heard Luter be a guy who made an impressive play the other day. Womack's a guy who has a year under his belt, inside outside guy. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, you're right. You're right about the cornerback depth.
Yeah, and I mean the luck. I guess the positive thing about it is they've not the 49ers haven't what's it called neglected this position like
Yeah,
they may have earlier in the Shanahan Lynch regime, right? They have bodies they've put in draft capital and drafting guys that fit the mold of what they're looking for. So, we are in a situation where I think Mooney Ward, Lenore end up being the starter. I agree with you. I think Oliver is going to be the starting nickel. So that's 3. And if they pick another 2, we already know who those 2 guys are probably going to be. It's
yeah,
going to be Womack and it's going to be Luter. So to me, they at least have the 5 guys that they want. It's just about we just believe they could be the guys. Can they show to be the guys, which hopefully this offseason we're able to see.
no, definitely. Now we talked about questions. Want to ask you, what are some questions you're hoping get answered in this kind of off season?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, Rohan, starter wise, there aren't that many questions outside of the quarterback, right? Who's going to be the starter? But even then, like, I'm not worried. Like, if it's Purdy, I'm completely content. If it's Trey, I'm completely content. My biggest question, because this has been such a important problem for the 49ers, is the depth. This is 1 year going in where it's just like the depth isn't as solidified, right? We lost a lot of people. We lost Jimmy Ward. Obviously we feel like, we drafted a guy who possibly could be the heir apparent. We got Gibson there who played really well last season. However, you know, who's going to fill that role? We lost Aziz. Who's going to be that third linebacker? Because we've seen Dre Greenlaw get injured, and we haven't really missed that because Aziz was able to come in. Can Oren Burks be that guy? Is Flanagan DFF still on the team?
Yeah,
Yeah. Is he going to be able to take that step up and, fill that role in case a Greenlaw goes down? Or is the linebacker out of TCU that they got, is he going to step up and fill that role? Along the defensive line, right? You said the interior, there's a lot of depth, but on the outside, we don't know as much as far as the depth there as well. And then, so to me, especially on the defensive side, that depth is question marks for me. Are those guys going to be good enough to hold the fort down in case any of these starters go down, because we know more than not it's more likely that some of these guys are going to go down. In the past, especially the last few years, the defense has still been able to be elite because the depth has been there. It's right now that depth is unproven. Let's just put it that way. So I think that's a big question that I want to see answered.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing where I think the 49ers right now are at a stage where I think a lot of good teams like the Eagles are also entering. It's that depth is leaving pretty much every offseason. Why? Because you have players on cheaper deals that are outplaying their contracts. So they go to free agency, and when those deals expire, they obviously get bigger deals. You can't match it. And so you're at a stage right now where you have to recycle talent via the draft. You have to trust the younger guys, maybe guys who aren't as developed to hopefully take a next step. We talked about some of those guys like Drake Jackson and players like that where you've got to hope they take the next step. But the 49ers also this year, I think, especially in a year that's so crucial, are at a point where it's interesting because you didn't have a first or a second round pick, right? And so in trying to fill that depth, you don't have as it's not that you don't have as much capital, it's just you don't have as much high end capital
Right.
where you might feel more comfortable replacing some of those guys. And then obviously you pile that along questions like drafting a kicker in the third round. Um, and that's another spot where you could have added more depth at another position and things like that. Maybe overdrafting at some points. And this is where, drafting becomes really crucial. And the 49ers have really done well, obviously, in drafting in later rounds. And that's really helped them along the way. But I think drafting now, especially in the following years when players become more expensive, is going to be really, really crucial, as well as maintaining the health of your top guys.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, a lot of teams, the teams that end up making it deep into the playoffs and win Super Bowls are because they have that depth. All teams have to deal with, their stars or starters going down. So that those teams that are able to sustain obviously are going to be the ones that go deep. And I think it's going to be key for the 49ers this year as well.
I think so too. Harold here has a question that I want to hear your take on. Everyone assumes the defense will be fine. However, with the new defensive coach, question is, will the defense drop off? I'll rephrase this a little bit. New defensive coach. Seems like it'll be a similar system, but obviously different tendencies. Steve Wilkes, obviously a coach who has a good track record, but new defensive coach, obviously some new pieces in there. Do you think, I won't say is there going to be a drop off, but do you think there might be a bit of a learning process where, since the offense has relied on the defense a lot, do you think that could harm the 49ers early on?
Rohan, this is something I've actually spoken on with Jesse. This I think is one of the, one of the things that I think is going underneath and not talked about nearly enough is that all of a sudden Steve Wilkes is going to just come in and I'm not saying that he won't, but it's just like a foregone conclusion that he's going to come in and there's going to be absolutely no drop off and everything is just going to be smooth sailing. But this is the biggest change of a defensive coordinator in the history of Shanahan and Lynch. And what I mean by that is it's not that this is the first time that there's been a defensive coach change, but this is the first time somebody external has been brought in that hasn't been part of this culture from the beginning, right? Initially, it was Saleh. It was a seamless transition to DeMeco Ryans. Even though DeMeco Ryans brought some wrinkles in, he still was very familiar with all the player, all the terminology. Everybody knew about him. Both Saleh and DeMeco Ryans are high energy type guys that you saw on the sidelines, and that you saw their energy seep through this defense on the sidelines. Well, Steve Wilkes is already making a change that he's not going to be calling the defense on the sidelines. He's calling it from the box. So already we're noticing a huge shift in the way things are run now.
Yeah.
Is this going to be a huge change? Who knows? I don't know. But the fact that things are changing and are going to be so different, we're going from guys that are primarily linebacker coaches to somebody who's primarily a secondary coach. So, like, obviously the way people are going to those positions are going to be seeing the game is going to be different. Clearly, already making the choice to go in the box versus be on the sidelines is different. So, yeah, I believe that this defense is still going to be elite because of the talent on the defense. But I do think that there is still a question mark because Steve Wilkes is a well-respected coach in this league. He's been a well-respected defensive coordinator. However, he hasn't had a lot of success as far as the stats from his defense. Like he hasn't coached a top 10 defense. And I think a lot of that is because he's always been in really, really terrible situations with, the Cleveland Browns and obviously all the changes as far as what was going on in Carolina. And he hasn't had the talent that he's going to have with the 49ers. So I think he's going to be fine. But I think the fact that everybody is just so confident is interesting because it is a big change for the 49ers.
And I'm not going to say I push back because I know you're not saying anything negative about Steve Wilkes at all. To me, I I know people assume the defense will be fine. I think there are going to be differences. Number one, the blitz rate I think will increase. Steve Wilkes is more aggressive, and he said he wants to be more aggressive, even with the similarities in defense. The coach in the box thing is certainly intriguing, obviously, because when you talk about Steve Wilkes and coaching in the box, the 49ers, right, they have an infectious energy, and a lot of the infectious energy has come from defensive coordinators instilling it in the players. You've seen all the videos about D'Amico Ryans and Robert Saleh on the sidelines hyping up their guys. And I do really wonder, like, because obviously we can't quantify that, wonder how big of an impact does that make? Or does that force other players to step up as leaders and maybe change the culture in that way? And so I do agree. As for a drop off, I don't know though if it comes via the coaching. I do think Steve Wilkes is a pretty solid coordinator, and I think there's a level of trust and probably respect for him in the building. But again, I wonder if that learning curve, like I said initially with the question, I wonder if that learning curve is something to experience, like that the 49ers will experience. Because especially early on when the 49ers start slow, like you saw last year, they relied on that defense. That defense was huge and even lost games like that Denver game in week 3 where they really relied on their defense and still couldn't pull it out.
Right.
Against Pittsburgh week 1. That's going to be a team with a strong defense. Who knows how the offense plays in week 1? Again, like how do they rely on their defense? And I think it's somewhat of an easier slate to start off, so maybe that helps the learning curve a bit as well. Do I think overall in the season there's going to be a drop off on the defense? No, I think the defense is still going to be pretty solid. Maybe a drop off, maybe from like top 1 to top 5, but I do wonder how does it start off?
Yeah, and I could see this defense be top 2 defense, right? Top 3 defense. I don't necessarily think that. I mean, the talent is still super elite, and I personally think we've gotten better as far as just the starters, right? With Javon Hargrave there, the depth of the interior defensive line. I think that our depth is higher than it's been in quite some time. With Kinlaw looking better, and obviously Kalia is going to be there, and so on and so forth. So I think that there's a lot of positives for this defense, but for me, it's just something that's never talked about, which I think is interesting that people just expect it to be a seamless transition, which, hopefully it is. And more than likely it will be.
I think so too. Last thing we got to talk about before we head on out, because there was some interesting NFL related news. Rule changes. 3 new rule changes. One about the kickers. The big one, obviously, about the 3 quarterbacks that relates to the 49ers. Do you remember the third one? I can't remember off the top of my
Yeah,
head.
well, not a rule
Oh, the
change, but they're
Thursday.
flexing
Yeah,
the Thursday night game. Yeah.
the Thursday night one. Let's start actually with the kicker one, because 49ers drafted a kicker in the 3rd round. A lot of the justification around it, or not a lot, but some of it was we got a guy now that can kick touchbacks. Robbie Gould struggled with it last year. That really hurt the special teams because opposing field obviously getting a better field position starting off. That again, not necessarily great for special teams because you can't kick it into the end zone. Now though, the rule for those of you guys that don't know, if you fair catch it inside the 25-yard line, ball automatically starts at the 25. I believe this is the same rule as in college.
Correct.
1 year basis, trial basis. What do you think about this rule?
I mean, obviously, it takes away, I think, one of the most exciting plays in the NFL, which has already kind of been taken away from the rule changes, anyways, which is the kick return, right? I was talking with Jesse last night. I remember growing up watching Devin Hester, watching some of these great kick returners, and it was just such an explosive play and something that was very, very exciting. Could change around the whole momentum. So I personally hate it. I think that it's a stupid, stupid rule. Not only are you taking away, not only did we just, there was no reason to get rid of gold now, right? As far as, that was the big reason why I think they were just like, hey, we can upgrade and pay less money to somebody who has a stronger leg. But even, the amount now, the turnovers there are going to be less, because what's the point now of running it out? You're going to be safer anywhere if you catch it on the 5, catch it on the 10. It's safer just to fair catch it. You make sure that, you keep possession of the ball and you go out to the 25. I just think I guess I don't understand it. They keep playing it like it's a health thing,
Yeah.
but I don't necessarily, I mean, but there's no stats as far as how many injuries are happening on these kickoffs kind of thing. So to me, I think it's a stupid rule. Is it going to be a significant change? I don't know. We'll probably forget about it. And, but yeah, I just think I just feel like it's taking away from some of the excitement of kick returns.
I think so too. I understand the health part, obviously, because I do think that there are injuries because it's the high speed collisions that come. Punt returns are different. Kick returns, though, where both sides are moving at high speeds, um, I can understand that portion. As for the 49ers, I mean, yeah, I think it just adds more fuel to the fire, understanding the 49ers drafted a kicker in the third round for a stronger leg. And now that stronger leg is getting minimized, and it
Right.
furthers I think it just furthers the pressure on Jake Moody because kickoffs, I think, is something that he didn't really have to worry about. It's something I think he had in the bag in terms of touchback rate and things like that. But now it just furthers because you need to be a real, real solid kicker at the one thing that's important, field goals.
Right.
And I think it's just adding more pressure, especially after obviously in only 3 attempts we saw, but a miss from 48 yards the other day. I think it is a little tougher for the 49ers to justify that third round pick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think this rule doesn't put as much pressure on Jake Moody as the draft pick, right? So we'll see. Hopefully he shuts all of it down and becomes one of the greatest kickers of all time.
Hopefully, that's the hope right now. Let's talk about the second rule change, though. The one that a lot of people talked about with the 49ers last year, the 3 quarterback rule. Now, so for those of you guys that don't know, you can roster 3 or you can have 3 quarterbacks on the active game day roster. That was okay before. The difference, though, that third guy can be, he doesn't have to be on your active 43 or 46-man game day roster. It can be one of the other guys. It has to be a guy on the 53-man roster, not on the practice squad, or it can be one of the elevation guys. But this essentially gives you another game day spot for a quarterback. Reason, obviously, I mean, we saw this year with the NFC Championship game. 49ers had 2 active quarterbacks, both got injured, ran out of quarterbacks essentially, and Brock Purdy had to play an entire half with a hurt UCL, and he couldn't throw the football. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously deemed the Shanahan rule. I think obviously it has to do with that game. I think it's terrific, man. And obviously for the 49ers, this means they could keep all 3 quarterbacks suited up each game, which they don't have to make that decision who goes to the practice squad or whatever the case may be, which I think is great. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm all for this rule.
There we go. We're good. But I'll say something a little different because I don't mind the rule. I don't think the impact is as big as other people or as others I think take it out to be. In that, I think this rule is more about safety than it is about, you know, having a chance to win the game. So what do I mean by that? When you're down to your third quarterback, like let's just go to the NFC Championship game, right? I think the reason for this rule is you don't want an injured quarterback further risking himself to play in that game. Instead, having an actual quarterback who might not have changed the game at all, but at least having an active quarterback, a guy who can play, be in the game. That's the way that I view this. And so for me, I don't view this necessarily as too significant. Do I think this changes the way that uh, teams go with their three quarterbacks? I don't think so. I think teams still have an active structure where they'll have like because only nine teams, maybe a few teams, but only 8, 9 teams really out of the 32 go with third quarterback. I think that this doesn't change too much in their eyes either because having to take up a roster spot on the 53-man roster it is tough for some teams. So I think they'll have the practice elevation instead. But yeah, it's a good rule for player safety. I don't know though how big the impact of the rule will be overall.
Well, I mean, I think it could keep teams being a little more conservative with their quarterbacks, right? We saw, I call it the Kyle Shanahan rule, but you look at what happened with Miami and Tua, where they brought him back even though he had a concussion, right? Or obviously there was a lot of
Right,
cracks
right. The
that were
safety
there,
part,
but
yeah.
yeah, to further your point, but maybe they could now be a little more conservative with if there is a head injury or if there is any type of injury with that starting quarterback. If you have competent quarterbacks there, I think eventually if this continues to be a rule, Rohan, I can see this changing the way, keeping three solid quarterbacks, because it is necessary. If your starting quarterback goes down, now you're really banking on your backup quarterback not getting injured. And the way that the game is right now, those injuries are just bound to happen. So having three quarterbacks, I think it is going to play a big role for some team in some game this year.
Yeah, I like the rule. I like the rule as well. And so let's talk about the final one. Thursday night flexing. This won't impact the 49ers as much. They have two, which I believe is the limit, which and I think it's week 3, and then whenever they play Seattle, week 12, I believe. And so they got their 2 Thursday night games already. But how do you think about this rule in general in terms of the league?
Yeah, I think this tells us what the league really feels about the fan bases and what they really think, what they value more, and they value the TV deals way more than they value the fans in the stands, because this is a total fu to the
Right.
fans. That hey, you can't plan, even maybe you planned and you saved up all this money to be able to buy tickets for you and your family, and you have a full day to tailgate and make it an event, and all of a sudden, hey, there's not going to be a game on Sunday for you guys anymore. You're going to have to figure out a way to make it on Thursday, take the time off work, and all of that type of stuff. I think it's just it just shows that they really care more about the TV deals, because some of those Thursday night games, especially later on in the season, were just terrible. And I think that they just value the TV partners more than they value the actual fans. And they're like, we would rather make sure we could put on a very good game on Thursday versus care about how this is going to inconvenience the actual fans that go to the stadiums.
Yeah, man, I agree with this part, right? Like when I initially tweeted, I don't understand this, and I meant that for the fan perspective. And I think this is really purely about TV deals. Last year, so I think it's Amazon. Amazon has the rights for all the Thursday night games.
Mm-hmm.
Thursday night games last year were horrible, especially like we saw some really, really bad games.
Yeah.
And so, from a fan at home perspective, I can understand like you want to see a good Thursday night game. And for Amazon, but I think this is more about like that deal specifically. They don't want to just be losing money because they're trotting out terrible games. And so I can understand that portion. And the flexing is only for 5 weeks, right? Or 5 potential games where they can flex out, which is like week 13 to 18 or something like that. And there can only be a maximum of 2 flexes, I think, here. But still, like that portion, those fans that are likely planning those trips well before, you do get like that 28-day notice. But I think that that's still disrupting that fan experience a lot. Good for the fans at home, good for the TV deals, and good for the owners. I don't think it's great for everybody else, especially, because even with the players, even if you're getting a month's notice, it still disrupts the schedule. You're
Right.
changing practice schedules that week from going from essentially a full week of practice to very limited practice, and then obviously the next week changes as well.
It is what it is, man.
It is what it is. We'll see what sticks, what doesn't stick. But Sunil, I mean, it's been a fun hour. We talked OTAs, talked quarterbacks, got that out of the way. Talked about position groups that we could see having battles in OTAs, and then capped it off with these last rule changes. Any last thoughts before we head on out today?
Nah, just stick with the channels. Obviously, now that there's actual football being played, it's going to be excited to hear what stories come out. And I'm excited for you to get out there to those practices, Rohan, so you can let us know exactly what's going on day by day.
Oh yeah, man, I'm excited for that too. Last thing I'll say before we head on out, as 49ers throwback reminded us, Super Bowl 60 is at Levi's. That's going to be a fun one. Hopefully, the 49ers are in the stadium for their own Super Bowl. That was cool news that we saw drop last week. But guys, thank you guys all for tuning in. For those of you guys in the comment section, appreciate always uh, having our support. Those of you guys listening with the audio, make sure you guys stay tuned, keep downloading the podcast, and we'll be back soon with some more content.